Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this professional development opportunity. I'm Jessica Roberts, Senior Director of Business Development and Philanthropy for NCEA, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A window or chat to me directly. We'll monitor the questions and try to answer them in the allotted time. At the end of the session, I'll share a link to an online survey which will give you information on how to receive a certificate of completion for the webinar. But we also appreciate any feedback that you were able to provide on the webinar today. Today's webinar is Fund Accounting 101 with Catholic Schools, and it's brought to you by Blackbaud. Our speaker today is Charlie Lytle, and we will be focusing on comprehensive understanding of fund accounting and its key components and best practices. Thank you for joining us today. Before I turn it over to our speaker, we're going to go ahead and begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. God, we are grateful for our teachers and friends who help us every day. Bless them with the patience and wisdom and help us to show them respect and appreciation. Let us be a light unto others. In Jesus' name, amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then I'll go ahead and kick it over to Charlie. Thank you for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm happy to be here. As you have questions, as Jessica mentioned, please put them in the chat. She will let me know when we have a question, so I'll make sure I pause throughout. So our agenda today is I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of understanding accounting, about specifically fund accounting, and the difference between for-profit software maybe and not-for-profit software. We're going to talk about some of those key components of fund accounting, handling of restricted funding and donations, which are becoming more prevalent in our schools today. Also managing tuition, with tuition being a large percentage of typical revenue for a Catholic school or really any private school. We want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits that are there and opportunities that are out there, as well as other benefits of fund accounting for schools and why it is important. As Jessica mentioned, my name is Charlie Lytle. I'm a Senior Manager of Solution Consulting at Blackbaud, which means that I manage and work with a team of former school employees that have used our software but are also very talented in understanding. We're former administrators, IT directors, development directors, teachers, registrars, you name it. They joined me and our account executive team to talk to customers, prospects, some like yourselves, about the various Blackbaud products in some of the different ways. But we truly are consultative in our approach. I am the former Director of Admissions and Enrollment Management at Archbishop Moeller High School here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Moeller High School was an all-boys Catholic high school of about 940 young men. I always joke that I was in charge of the admissions and enrollment management, which also meant financial aid. So this side of my gray hair was for the admission side, and the other side of my head with gray hair was always about the financial aid part. But I'm also the CFO of my wife's business. She has a for-profit business. We use QuickBooks for that business. And so I have some good perspective on what it is that we see from the school side and I'm also a proud grandfather of my grandson, Luke, who's about 21 months old now. So let's get into it and understand a little bit about, the understanding of accounting and fund accounting and the differences between the two. So, regular for-profit accounting solutions, they really are built for maximizing workflows and reporting of profitability and financial performance. As an individual that uses QuickBooks, which is a for-profit accounting solution, I can truly attest to that. A lot of the reports are all about profitability. The dashboards that come in, I'm seeing mostly what my profit is, and I have to kind of drill down and look in other places to see what my outstanding AR is maybe, or what our expenses are, and our expenses up or down in one way or another. But it is all about the financial and financial performance. It's also about cash flow and cash flow management, which also gets into that financial performance as well. On the flip side, fund accounting is really built for maximizing workflows and reporting of accountability to your donors, to your parents, to the parish itself, to the diocese itself. It's also about transparency. What is it that we're doing with the funds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. And then is also stewardship. We are out there stewarding, asking for donations, looking for donations to help us with running our school from a day-to-day basis. And really, I look at Catholic and private schools, and it's how you stay in business. A lot of it is also on the rise and or fall of your reputation. So there's been this increased request for transparency and accountability from private schools and Catholic schools in general on the reporting, on that financial reporting. And also there's demands from our donors now, potentially even more so than in the past, on where are my dollars being spent? And how are they helping you increase programs, increase enrollment, increase retention of students? In this age of digital communication with social media and the 24-hour news cycle, perceived violations of any use of public trust, especially at schools, it gets out there fast. It can get out there with only half information. So at schools, we really have to have that increased discipline to make sure that we are using the right solutions to help us with accountability, transparency, and continue to be able to steward more dollars. There's also the increased focus from our donor intent and our accountability, where your school and those in the business office really have to anticipate questions, challenges that may come up, and be able to provide timely information and articulate that back, whether it is on financial performance or on recruitment. I remember our board of limited jurisdiction was very important for me to know my numbers and where we stood at any given time. With tuition being such a high percentage of a school's revenue, those two kind of go hand in hand. It was very important for us to stay on top of that. The unfortunate piece is that some of the traditional or for-profit accounting solutions that are out there that we have are really ill-equipped to help our Catholic schools or parish schools make good decisions of being able to manage those work streams, but also being able to manage the donations, grants, if you're out there procuring grants, auxiliary revenue and auxiliary funds that might come from various from state agencies, and any investment income. So if you're fortunate enough to be able to generate enough funds and you're investing those funds, how are you managing that interest that you're generating off of that? And you really need something that is tailored for schools. And that's where fund accounting does come into play. We also need systems that are, some of these for-profit systems are not necessarily designed for schools. And they don't offer some of the automation. They may offer some modules that might feel clumsy for the tuition component collection, or the time and the energy that it takes you and your staff to be able to work through that. You need a solution that works with you, that does provide you that high level of transparency and accountability, so you can make those solid and really important strategic decisions that you need to make. And thinking about the different resources and the different major resources that you have. I really think there's usually 2 or 3 major revenue resources that a school has, and all of these are really should be managed through a true fund accounting solution. First and foremost, there's tuition. I think the latest stat I saw was 78% of an average school's revenue is all tuition based. I'm also a firm believer that tuition is really should be treated as almost a restricted fund. You have parents, and sometimes I used to call them property plus payers, because you pay property taxes. That money goes to help the public school system, but then you're choosing to make a decision to send your child to a private school and a private Catholic school. So it really gets into whether or not you believe that tuition is restricted or not. There is a responsibility through the other systems that you have at the school to be able to provide some of that communication in the forms of the learning management student information system, that you are providing the outcomes that the parents are expecting you to see based upon the tuition that they're paying. We always believe here at Blackbaud that happy parents pay their tuition on time. They give back with their time, their treasure, and their talent to really help you also recruit more students just like themselves. A second fund is contributory revenue, and really depending upon your school, this could vary as well too. We typically see K through 12 Catholic schools or Catholic high schools have a dedicated staff that is dedicated to specific events like galas and annual funds and class competitions, or specific programs, planned giving, or a capital campaign. And based upon the size of the contributory revenue, it could also be in the form of an endowment. And an endowment typically is a larger amount that has even greater restrictions on it, and therefore greater legal requirements, which is where a fund accounting solution can help you. The third source, and sometimes an underutilized source, is grants. There are a number of grants out there that schools can procure, and grants can be that great untapped resource potentially for you. But even grants come with some of that accountability and transparency requirements of the grant and the grantor to ensure those funds are being tracked back to the grant's objectives, and really to the justification that you put together when you applied for that grant. So you have all this different revenue, but then how do those come through? And so we really look at it in 3 different ways as well. There are general funds, which are used for the day-to-day operation of the school. Some of that could be parish subsidies. If you're pre-K through 8, you may be getting funds from the parish. But then there's tuition, there's annual fund, there are fundraisers that you do at the school's events, program fees before care and after care, maybe even extracurricular, some of those athletic fees and gate fees that are also part of what those general funds for. You can use those funds on pretty much almost anything. A lot of it gets used up in salaries and medical benefits, paying utility bills, so on and so forth. But they are, everyone loves general or unrestricted funds. You then have restricted funds, which are donor-defined funds with specific use cases. And some, you may think of these in the way of named scholarships, or a facilities upgrade, which came about from a capital campaign. Could also be state vouchers. And while vouchers may be a discount, they also, in some states that we work with, those are coming back as an individual check to an individual student. And so therefore you need to make sure that you have something in place from a tuition management standpoint and the financial solution to be able to track that fund and be able to reconcile that. Free and reduced lunches is also another form of restricted funds, as well as auxiliary funds. Grants and even PPE money from the COVID days are also part of that as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, endowed funds are typically restricted funds, typically gifts greater than $50,000, We typically invest those funds to where only the interest income is generated can be used. Maybe it's along the lines of a scholarship. So they are very restricted in use. From the time of COVID, we've also seen a lot of significant changes in the way that revenue is generated and supported. We've touched on a few of these things here, but I think at least where I live, when I go to Mass on Sunday, the pews aren't as full as they once were. And I see in the weekly bulletin that the funding is, below budget as well too. So that is putting more and more pressure on schools to be able to sustain themselves. You either raise tuition or you got to raise money someplace else in order to help offset that. State vouchers have appeared in some states. In the last 4 or 5 years, they've doubled. We're around 23 states now offer some sort of state voucher. We're now seeing some of our states in our where schools are, where they're really leaning into those families that may in the past didn't receive any financial assistance, but now with the state funds, they are getting a discount, if you will. And it is through that discount now we're seeing some schools have success in going back and asking those families maybe to donate to the school the money that they received from the state that they typically would not have gotten. And again, just another way of generating some of that revenue and some of those resources. Some of the other things that are impacting schools that it's important also to be able to track is the same thing is affecting our personal households. Inflation is impacting the cost of heating and cooling and lighting the schools each and every day. And it's also impacted the retention of our teachers. Teacher burnout is at an all-time high. There's a cost of when you lose a teacher, just like there's a cost of when you lose a student, because there's also a cost of recruiting those teachers and the onboarding costs that's associated with that. A true funded accounting solution like Blackbaud is really going to help you. Blackbaud's financial edge, I should say, really is going to help you be able to track both those revenues and expenses that are associated with these funds. Thinking about a capital campaign, you're going to receive those specific contributions for that capital campaign. There also may be expenses for that capital campaign, and there may be marketing costs to help you kick off that capital campaign as well too. All those, when using a true fund accounting solution, do allow you to track both revenue and expenses specific to that campaign, to that fund, if you will. And it is through that you are able to then easily provide reporting, provide a financial report of your financial position relative to that capital campaign. But that capital campaign, those dollars, when they do come in, those are those restricted funds that we're talking about that you're seeing here on the screen as well too. For those who are also out procuring grants, being able to report the funds where they're used in your and where they're being used aligned with that justification that you provided to get that grant. Being able to tie that back to maybe a group of students or sharing those outcomes that they achieved is not only important, but it's also required. And it also can set you up for some additional rounds of grant funding from similar sources or even the same source, which would be great as well. So let's talk a little bit about why we have to handle restricted funding to donations and grants in a certain way, and your ability to be able to look at that and to manage that. Again, I talked about there's a lot of accounting, there's a lot of rules that are responsible for that, but there's a little bit of when you have a true fund accounting solution, there's a little bit of change management, and it's just kind of the way that you manage your school and your school finances is a little bit different, and it's beneficial because you're able to see where that money belongs. We'll take the situation of my situation where my other job that I have as CFO for my wife's business. We use QuickBooks. We're a for-profit business, right? I am looking at our bank accounts as my single source of truth of where do I stand from a cash positions. I know the revenue is coming in, I know the expenses going out, and they all are coming out of different bank accounts. But even us even my wife's business in the situation that we're in, we have to pay sales tax and we have to pay income tax, and we we want to have a profit and we have operating expenses. We ended up creating 5, 6 different bank accounts that we bring money into one, but then we disperse it out. The difference and really the challenge there with that situation is the fact that the reconciliation process, the time it takes me to go through and do all that, is very labor intensive. And I'll be honest, there's times where I've made a few mistakes with that. But with a fund accounting solution, when these different restricted funds come through, or even the unrestricted funds come through, there are ways for you to easily put that information, receive the revenue, apply the expenses, and have it all tie to a specific that specific fund. And so now, instead of looking at the bank account, I'm looking at the general ledger, I'm looking at the reporting and the dashboards I have to make sure I know exactly where I stand at any point in time. There are also, as I mentioned, some requirements that are required by law. So we must provide individual income statements and balance sheets in order to, in addition to total reports for the entire school. But with a nonprofit fund accounting system, we can help because we will meet unique financial reporting requirements. You can drive different business processes such as program and endowments and not really have to change much in the way that you set up your solution. You're able to provide better internal accountability to safeguard any of your assets that you have that are related maybe to those restricted funds or to those grants. I think probably the best thing that we do and that we've seen, and I saw when I was at a school, because we used a fund accounting solution, we used Blackbaud's fund accounting solution, Financial Edge NXT, was the ease to which I was able to get reports out for both my departmental expenses that I had as an admissions director, but also knowing where I stood relative to the different financial aid components that we had. My school, we had over 140 different need-based named scholarships. Some of those were endowed and quasi-endowed. And it was very important for me to know at any given time where I stood, but more importantly, who did I allocate those funds to? Because like a grant, a restricted fund, I needed to be able to tie donor and student together. And I was able to do that both through our Financial Edge solution, as well as our Razor's Edge solution and our tuition management solution. I knew where all that money was going, and it tracked very nicely and easily throughout the connected systems as well. But also using a fund accounting solution will also mean that you have less workarounds, which saves you and your staff's time. Again, we are built for schools. Blackbaud's actually, very first product that we built was for a school. And so we know schools, we know our customers, and we constantly are working with nonprofits like schools, like animal shelters, like whatever, where we know that we have leaner staffs, and therefore we need to have those smoother and automated workflows that also help us stay aligned with proper internal controls and can pass our audit as well. There are a number of different rules that we definitely follow in fund accounting. Some of this was started back in the 1990s with the Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB, as you might hear of it. There have been some revisions in 2016 that have updated, and which has given us even better understanding and requirements of what we need to have from a fund accounting solution. As I mentioned before, those for-profits will use their bank account to kind of be their system of truth, but we really need to be able to see where all the revenue is at a school at any given time, and being able to report on that, on those funds very, very easily. Jessica, I just want to pause and see if there's any questions at this point in time.
Nothing that's come up.
Okay.
I think the only thing I would say is, in your professional opinion, what is the best practice of breakdown for some of these? Like, how much should an overall budget be relying on something like fundraising or grant writing versus the tuition piece when we're planning out, what we're looking at? I'm just curious more than anything.
So the software?
Um, I guess in terms of like breaking it down, because I see on here you've got, an annual fund and an overall
Yep.
budget.
Yep.
Majority of the funds are coming through financially. What are you thinking
Yeah.
the breakdown tends to be?
Yeah, again, it goes back to where the revenue is coming in. Most of the revenue comes in is tuition based, and so therefore a lot of the funds that support hitting that revenue number, right? Helping families, reducing the cost, bringing that in is coming through some sort of financial aid number. Sometimes annual funds can be somewhat restricted in their approach, but they also can be, at my school, it was what fueled our kind of general financial aid account. I also switched mindset with our school and really looked at the funds that we had received as more as an investment, because we needed to be a very good steward for those who are giving money, even just as a $25 donation that someone intended to make at any given time. We needed to be able to let our families know that this just doesn't come freely, that the money tree outside has a limit to how many leaves are on it, so to speak. And once all those leaves are gone, I think that's why schools start in the fall, because the leaves fall off, right? And there's no money left sometimes. But we tend to make sure that they understand that it's through the generosity of others that we're able to pay that forward. And I think that's also where we're starting to see things like some of these state vouchers and whatnot come through that are very helpful, which is then allowing schools to then utilize that unrestricted money to do other smaller capital campaign improvements, like improvements to the faculty and staff lounge, or improving security, or adding more programs, getting better content, doing more professional development. But all those, even some of that needs to really be tracked so we can look at, be very transparent. I think the more that we can be accountable and transparent at schools with where our dollars are being spent, the better off we are. Because, I remember coming into the education space and going, wait a minute, who would have a business to where we don't charge what it really costs to educate? That, it would just kind of blew my mind at the beginning, but now, I understand it. Our biggest expense is our labor, and our labor is expensive, both from a salary standpoint and then the support for that in terms of healthcare benefits and 401k and other things that we do for our schools. So, I think every school is going to be a little bit different. But I do feel like tends to be a little bit more pressure on our pre-K through 8 traditional diocesan grade schools. Some of them are in older buildings, right? And we've got those costs of maintaining that. We have, you know, sometimes they're landlocked and limited, but we have to figure out other ways to offset maybe what the parishes used to give us as well too. Is doesn't seem as recent, but it was 17 years ago in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, the feeder schools stopped supporting the transition of their students from the parish grade school to the high school. And that could be $3,000, $4,000. That made it more affordable for families, right, to go. But now that that money's gone, you know, somebody's got to make that up. And that's where we're seeing our high schools probably do more fundraising than before. But I also think it's trickling down to and you all are probably seeing that as well too. We're seeing it trickle down into the grade school level. So good question though.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. So keep moving along here. One of the bigger thing, and again, because I think tuition, you know, because it's such an important piece, managing that tuition, being able to provide a tuition program that's out there. I know our friends at FACTS have some prevalence in our Catholic schools. Blackbaud does as well. And you know, the whole part of this is to make that process as smooth and as easy as possible. It needs to be a very clear and robust collection process. And I can speak from experience on that. Also integrating potentially an enrollment agreement with that process to signing up for auto drafts and making it very easy really helped out a number of schools that I have worked with in the school that I was at. But you need to have a very clear and robust collection process, not something that is you know, you rely upon spreadsheets and whatnot. There's just too many options out there for errors to occur, but you also need flexibility. You need to have families have flexibility both in the payment plans and the payment methods that they are using. I think it's really important for you to look at your policies and be consistent with your policies. Again, being at the high school, and we would have families who would prioritize paying for the athletic fee before they would pay for the tuition. And I used to remind families all the time that academics comes before athletics, even in the alphabet, and try to make a joke out of it. But I was very serious. We're in the business of educating and creating strong Catholic valued students, and hopefully families in the future. So we need to make sure that they're prioritized and they understand that. So having a process also where you can put out your policies and that you're consistently implementing those, whether they be for late fees, how you're going to charge for those, for families that would withdraw in the middle of the year. You have 10 families withdraw in the middle of the year. You still have commitments to all your faculty and staff to pay them, but you've now potentially lost 10 kids in the middle of the school year. I think it's always important to figure out why, but then it's also important to understand how you're going to pay for that, and being able to have the proper resources to do that is very important. Financial hold is also something that we should consider and make sure that we implement. We want to be empathetic to the situations, but again, as I mentioned before, you still have a responsibility to your families to you know, pull everything together, to pay your teachers, to continue to educate your kids, to keep the lights on, to keep the heat on, that type of thing. So you know, putting students potentially on financial hold, you know, for that next school year until maybe we got to get caught up. We have to have a plan in place to get us caught up. We don't have the luxury of just being able to wipe off that debt in some situations. And then as I mentioned before, that transparency of that investment, again, changing financial aid, considering it to be truly an investment. And then what other sources can you utilize? I spoke about scholarships. We had a plethora of scholarships or major donors. Maybe you're aligning them and creating some sort of mentorship, not only with the student, but with the family. Maybe you do a scholarship breakfast or have students write thank you notes, or but really there's different ways of how this investment in them is really making an impact, and how can that help you at your gala, at your annual appeal, to really maximize that. Like I said, state vouchers are a great way. Multiple sibling discounts is also another good way for you to help you manage that. But having a good solution in place that is easy for both you to utilize as well as your parents will make for a better and a more simplified way of collection of that tuition, that all-important tuition. So what are some of the other benefits of fund accounting for schools? So reporting and budgeting is a focus of fund accounting solution. The ease to which we can pull information, be able to scale down and scale up, be able to identify where those different funds are. Yes, you have cash, you have dollars available, but again, you have requirements that you must maintain in order to look and utilize those funds in the right way. Again, it gets back to donor stewardship and the intent. Being able to provide those donors at any given time, where has their money gone and how has it impacted your school? I think anytime that you receive any level of fund, no matter how big or how small, I think you need to have a good look inside of your school, the way that you're tracking things. Do we have an easy way for us to get that information? If you're doing a lot in spreadsheets, you're not being very efficient. Companies like Blackbaud and others who have true fund accounting solutions can help you really streamline and maximize the resources that you have. I've never been to a school that has people sitting around waiting for work to come their way. There's always something else that we're not getting to. And is there a way that our software can help us then get to and utilize and get to some of those other things that are probably more mission centric than some of the day-to-day work of entering an expense or issuing a credit or whatever the case may be. And then finally, internal controls. Part of it, transparency, part of accountability is going through an audit and making sure that from an audit standpoint that we have good ways that the software can help us with our data integrity, how we can eliminate and reduce duplicate entry through integrations that are built for solutions that are built for schools, how we can increase our confidence in some approval processes to make sure that the person that is submitting the request isn't the same person that's cutting the check. Again, those are pieces that of being able to show that not only to auditors, but then maybe even sharing some of those results and that report card, if you will, with your school families about how well you're doing things. Again, the segmenting of duties, just talked about that. And then finally, just kind of producing those accurate and timely financial reports. Similar to this chart that you see here, are you able to easily look at, and for every $6 that you raise, how much money you're really spending on development? You don't want it to be $5, right? You want it to be as less as you possibly can be. A fund accounting solution is also going to give you that fund balance sheet, so you can look at those expenses and make sure those expenses are staying in line and we're not spending somewhat out of control. So That's what I had for you. Hopefully you found some nuggets of information in there that can be helpful for you. I do want to open it up to any questions. I'm not seeing any in the chat, but maybe there are that you have, Jessica, that I'm not seeing.
I am not seeing any in the Q&A either.
Awesome. Okay. I do have a resource that Jessica's going to drop into the chat. Blackbaud has done a white paper, if you will, talking about some of the things that we shared today, that we touched on. Feel free to take a look at that information, utilize that information, and then reach out to us if you have questions. Here's also, if you want to take a screenshot, here's my email address. I will be at NCEA. I'm presenting along the same line, this topic. I love talking everything enrollment. I love talking everything finance. And so we'd be happy in everything in between, education, software, whatever. Happy to further the conversation outside of this webinar as well.
And it looks like we do have one question. I'm going to allow them to ask here. Hold on one second.
Hey, thank you. This is Kurt Hoyman at Just Met Jesuit High School in St. Louis.
Sure.
I don't know if anybody else is experiencing this, but I went to put something in the chat and it says chat disabled. So you may not be getting anything there in the chat because of that. So that's one thing. My question really was sort of more around the reporting, and I am new to not-for-profit. Spent my entire career, nearly my entire career, in for-profit industry, and we have Blackbaud, and honestly, I really struggle with the reporting on this thing.
Okay.
And I'd like to think that I'm reasonably skilled at figuring this stuff out, but I can't figure it out. One example is just a simple, I call it an income statement, profit and loss, compared to variance. On the revenue side, all the variances are positive until you get to the subtotal of revenue, and it's negative. And so I'm looking at the number is correct, but the sign is back.
Right. It's awesome.
No idea why this happens. Can't figure it out. So there's just silly stuff like that. So and could be that I'm new. So I'll acknowledge that.
Yeah. So the one thing I would point you back to, Kurt, would be is that you have a customer success manager. We can also get your information if you share that. We can have somebody proactively reach out. There's our support that's available that might be able to help you. And it seems like it could just be a pretty simple way to understand that. We also have training courses that are available. A lot of them are on demand. Most of our schools have unlimited training access. So that might be another approach as well. Or I found when I was working at a school and I had Blackbaud, or really any other software, is that just knowing who are the other schools around in my neighborhood, while we might compete every Friday night pretty viciously, we were all pretty willing to help each other out. That would be that could be another approach as well too. So we'll get you some support with that and be helpful to be happy to help you work through those challenges that you have and get you on your way.
Thank you. I just put my email address in the chat.
Great. We'll make sure that we get that taken care of.
Now we did have another question come up, Charlie, once you are ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any specific examples to share about how you can apply fund accounting? I'm somewhat familiar with the fund accounting, but would appreciate a specific baseline example that we could have.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would be capital campaign, for example. That could be a restricted fund. Some schools will do it that way. because they want to see the dollars coming in, but then there's expenses that are going to go out on the back end of that, whether it's starting to make the improvements, paying for the architectural drawings or whatever the case may be. So that is where that's one spot. Typically, though, with what fund accounting does, it will do, and it does it well within Blackbaud as well, is we do keep the natural account number. So office supplies is office supplies is office supplies, whether it is restricted or unrestricted fund, whether it's at one campus, because that's another way we could segment it. We could look at it by, if you have multiple campuses or multiple buildings, you could look at it that way. But the natural account number stays the same. And then you have whether either various departments, or we use projects quite a bit in at schools with our solution from fund accounting that does allow you then to see both the revenue, the expenses, even the budgeting and the tracking that would all come through. But capital campaign would be one. Another one I could think of would be like a name scholarship is another way to manage that. We are seeing a lot of schools for like state vouchers use a contra account. So they'll bring the revenue in, but then they disperse the money back out via financial aid. So at the end of the year, that's a $0 account fund. So they know that everybody who was supposed to receive money did receive the money, and we've dispersed that out. Hopefully that's helpful.
They said thank you very much.
Perfect.
And it looks like that's all of the questions I have.
Great. Well, that's all I had to share. So thanks so much.
Perfect.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending the webinar. We're continuously striving to improve the quality of our services for members based on feedback. Your input is important to inform our future work and improve services. If you could complete the survey that I'm dropping into the chat now, we would greatly appreciate it. And if you're interested in a certificate of attendance, once you complete that survey, you will get an automatic email. And if it doesn't come right away, double check your spam. Sometimes it goes through there with our Qualtrics system. But again, thank you, Charlie, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We will have this on demand in our on-demand library, and we'll also email out a recording. And I hope everybody else has a great rest of your week.
Yeah. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Hopefully we'll see you in Orlando soon.
Thank you all. God bless.
Yeah. Bye.